it's kind of interesting that as he edit that out. I lost my train of thought. This.
So, you saw the first one. We prepared for that eventuality by making a second one, and possibly even a third. You don't know. We begin our 5-part series on the original Avengers lineup at the only place we could, Iron Man. This is They Call Me Uncle.
Welcome back for panel number 2. Today's topic, the Invincible Iron Man. Iron Man has always been one of my favorite comic book characters, favorite superheroes. We have a ton of stuff to show you today that I've collected over the years. Back when I started reading Iron Man and collecting, nobody really knew about Iron Man. But Iron Man got his start in Tales of Suspense 39. Tales of Suspense had been a horror comic. They did little horror stories, and they decided to do a story about this guy, this Tony Stark. Now, the movie followed it really close, except they had to update it for the movie. In the comic, Tony Stark is this industrialist, playboy. I think I read somewhere he's kind of based on Howard Hughes. Kind of a ladies' man, very cool. Well, he is working for the U.S. government, and at the time, there was a war or a police action in Vietnam. So he actually goes to Vietnam, is field testing weapons, and he steps on a booby trap. When it goes off, you didn't know all this, did you?
No.
Good. When it went off, it put shrapnel in his chest. They just referred to him as the Reds. He was always fighting the communists. I think the leader was Wong Chu or something like that, and they grab him and say, hey, you got to make weapons for us. The movie followed it really close. They throw in this Chinese guy named Yinsen, and Tony had been developing stuff with transistors and magnets, and Yinsen was like a physicist or something, and so the two of them, they build the Iron Man suit, the chest piece to keep the shrapnel, to keep his heart going once the shrapnel reached it, I think's how they put it. So Tony puts on the chest piece, and just like in the movie, they're powering up the armor, and the bad guys are coming, so Yinsen runs out, draws their fire, and buys him time. Then Tony defeats all of the enemies and walks away. So they updated that when they did the movie. And so the gray armor, he used it in Tales of Suspense 39. Well, then in Tales of Suspense 40, he painted it gold because there was some comment that the gray one was frightening. So they painted it gold, and they kept it gold until Tales of Suspense 48. I think what happened was in 47, Tales of Suspense 47, he met a guy called the Melter. And the Melter melted part of his armor. So when he built a new one, he made it red and gold. And that kind of started Tony Stark in Iron Man that's red and gold. I think what I liked about Tony Stark was he was always innovating. Even though the armor stayed pretty consistent in its look, he was always upgrading and adding to it and improving it. Sometimes it was a reaction to an enemy that had damaged it. Sometimes it was just to add better technology. And so Iron Man has always been updating along with modern technology. I think the other thing I liked about the early Tony Stark was he wasn't a victim to what happened to him. He got the shrapnel in his chest, so he built something to keep it from killing him, and then used it to help people and turned into a hero. So some of the other comic books I have up here, This one over here in front of Mason, this is the first Iron Man I remember reading. And I mentioned last time that in the industry, comics that didn't sell, they'd tear the cover off and turn the covers in for credit. And so my mom would bring home these coverless comics, and that's the first one I remember reading. I remember it because I didn't know who the X-Men were, and that one guest stars Angel from the X-Men, the original X-Men. There's also an appearance by the X-Men, just a brief one, and an appearance by the Avengers, and I don't remember knowing who any of them were at the time.
Oh.
So I remember reading it, and I don't have that coverless copy, so I'm pretty sure we threw it away. So years later, I bought that one. Some of the others I wanted to talk about. So Iron Man was in Tales of Suspense 39 through 99. Now during that run, he was the main story up until the point that they reintroduced Captain America back into Marvel's mainstream comics. Once they did that, instead of creating a Captain America book and an Iron Man book, they shared it. And so each month they would have a story for both. Sometimes Iron Man was on the cover, sometimes Captain America was. They went back and forth, and sometimes the stories crossed over and they were both in it. And then they got to 99 and 100 became Captain America. And so the Captain America comics started at 100. There was something to do with, in the industry, if you created a new title and had it mailed to subscribers, there was some fee or something. So they tended to just keep the one going and give it a new name. And DC and Marvel both did that. So that's why Captain America, there isn't 1 through 99. It starts at 100. Iron Man, when they got to 99, it has an Iron Man story. There was no Iron Man 100 of that Tales of Suspense. They went to this. It was a one-shot of Iron Man and the Submariner. And they only did a one-shot. Then they gave Iron Man his own title. And Iron Man number 1 came out. I remember picking this up in Denver, Colorado. I think that's where I got the Iron Man Submariner also. A couple others of interest. This one, number 77, is the first one I remember buying in Evanston, Wyoming. And it had the cover. I remember it was cool looking, and Iron Man looked a lot more modern than the one I'd read way back. This one's from like 1974, 75. That other one's from the 60s. Then this one, I looked it up on Comic Vine because I was curious when the classic Iron Man armor started. And it started in this issue, and this is issue 85. The only difference between this armor and the previous one was like a nose piece. So there hadn't been a whole lot of change. And so the Iron Man comics, I really started reading around issue 77. As I collected them later, I read them all. And kind of the way Iron Man went was he fought a lot of villains who had some kind of technology, whether it was the Melter or the Unicorn or Blizzard or Whiplash. There's one called the Unicorn.
There's one called the Unicorn.
And of course he has a thing on his head.
Yes.
He doesn't look like a unicorn. I know.
Does he look like a rhino? Because Spider-Man has that?
Yeah, no, he looks a little more high-tech. It also seemed like he was always fighting communists. That was kind of a big deal in the early stuff. The Red Menace. What's interesting is I don't remember. So the movies have really established Pepper Potts as his girlfriend. Well, in the comics, Tony, because he's wearing this chest piece to keep his heart from stopping, he couldn't have relationships where, where anybody got close to him. And so Pepper kind of had a crush on him, but they never really got together in the comics. Pepper ended up marrying Happy, who was at the time Tony's bodyguard and kind of best friend. So in the early comics, it was all Tony and Happy and Pepper, and there was kind of a love triangle. Marvel did that a lot. We'll really talk about it in Thor. But with these three, there was a love triangle that ended with Happy and Pepper getting married and going off on their own life. If I had to pick somebody who was probably his long-term girlfriend, it was Bethany Cabe. Yeah, Bethany Cabe was his girlfriend quite a bit. She was a private investigator, security person. They seemed to have really click. There was another woman that was in quite a few. Whitney Frost, I think. She was Madame Mask. Problem was she was a villain. She was associated with kind of Marvel's version of the Mafia. But she wore this mask because she had a scar on her face or was disfigured. But Madame Mask was Iron Man's girlfriend off and on. But Bethany Cabe was probably his most long-term relationship. And so that's been kind of interesting and kind of a difference. The Iron Man comics ran from 1 to like 332 or something. It was kind of a villain of the week thing. A lot of what I enjoyed reading is when Iron Man was in with the Avengers, working with the Avengers. There were a lot of good artists on Iron Man. Towards the end of the run, it really went downhill. They turned him into a teenager. I just remember it really fell off towards the end. It was sort of painfully disappointing.
Morgan has been forcibly restrained to make the video a reasonable length. Tune in next week as we cover Iron Man's armor by generation, including the totally pointless stealth one. We also reveal our picks for who they totally should have cast instead of lame-o Oscar nominee Robert Downey Jr. Spoiler alert, most of them are dead. This has been They Call Me Uncle.
I'm Iron Man.
No, I'm Iron Man.
Oh, we can both be Iron Man.
There can only be one.